Good morning, everybody. Happy Monday. We have an amazing show for everybody today. Extra amazing. Ryan, bro show. People live for the pound.
Now the bro show, I was just realizing we're going to get to talk about Napoleon and World War II.
Wow.
What could be more bro show than that?
That is very, very bro show. That's right.
Little Roman Empire.
Can we talk about?
It covered.
God. See, I am not a Roman Empire guy. Sorry, everybody. I guess we could talk about Napoleon. Can we talk about the Napoleon movie and how awful it was? Maybe we can dunk on Ridley Scott.
We can.
That's when we'll make it a real bro show. All right, what are we covering today? This is the most difficult part of Crystal's job, and I always find it so trying. All right, good. I've got my rundown there in front of me. We're going to start off with J.D. Vance's speech at the Munich Security Conference, some major international fallout as a result of that. Europeans running scared. You've got Zelensky and others making declarations, some movements on the Ukraine peace talks. We're going to talk about Donald Trump and a Napoleonic-style tweet about he who saves the country cannot break a law. We're going to talk about Israel, Gaza, and Iran. Some guarantees from Bibi saying that he has been given the green light to attack Iran, and then Trump will back him up. Some other, however, indications about phase 2 of the ceasefire hostage deal. It's a complete mess. Ryan's going to break a lot of that down for us. We're going to talk about the Democrats. Jen Psaki absolutely stunned at Jon Stewart's declaration that the Democratic Party is not, in fact, democratic. And Luigi Mangione, he's resurfaced. He's got his first new public statement along with a website. Appears to answer a lot of fan questions. So even though he hasn't been in the news for a while, the Luigi fan club is alive and well. And then Ryan, you've got a segment called Woke or Based. Are you going to give us a preview of what it is? I've been ordered not to take a look at any of these elements. I have no idea what's going on.
We want Saagar going in fresh to our game show at the end here.
Okay.
That we're
It's
calling
Woke and or Based.
Woke or Based.
So I guess just for the people who aren't terminally online, I think they probably know what woke is at this point. Based is often what? It's a moniker that people in right-wing circles will use to say this is based, like
based is in like
this
is
based
good.
action.
This
yeah,
is cool.
exactly.
And it's like hard.
For example, we're gonna show people a video of a German diplomat crying. That's I would call based, in terms of being able to elicit that type of reaction from one of the most pathetic societies in the world. Ooh, oops! I forgot that Germany is one of our most viewed countries. Sorry, Germany. Anything before we get to that, Ryan? You want to plug anything?
I think you nailed that.
All right, thank you. It's a tough part of the job, man.
It is.
Usually I just sit here and drink my coffee. I'm off camera. It's nice.
When I do it, I go halfway through it and then I forget.
It's hard. Yeah. It's hard. All right. Okay. Let's get to Europe, as we said. J.D. Vance at the Munich Security Conference, returning. He originally went to the Munich Security Conference, I recall. I think it was back in 2022, where he was one of the only people to speak against U.S. assistance for Ukraine. This time around, however, returning as vice president, arguably one of the most important speeches given at the Munich Security Conference since 2007, when Vladimir Putin spoke there. Let's take a listen to the speech and we'll break it down.
In Washington, there is a new sheriff in town, and under Donald Trump's leadership, we may disagree with your views, but we will fight to defend your right to offer it in the public square, agree or disagree. We gather at this conference, of course, to discuss security, and normally we mean threats to our external security. I see many great military leaders gathered here today. But while the Trump administration is very concerned with European security and believes that we can come to a reasonable settlement between Russia and Ukraine, and we also believe that it's important in the coming years for Europe to step up in a big way to provide for its own defense, the threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within, the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values shared with the United States of America.
Now, I was struck that a former European commissioner went on television recently and sounded delighted that the Romanian government had just annulled an entire election. He warned that if things don't go to plan, the very same thing could happen in Germany, too. Now, these cavalier statements are shocking to American ears. For years, we've been told that everything we fund and support is in the name of our shared democratic values. Everything from our Ukraine policy to digital censorship is billed as a defense of democracy. But when we see European courts canceling elections and senior officials threatening to cancel others, we ought to ask whether we're holding ourselves to an appropriately high standard. And I say ourselves because I fundamentally believe that we are on the same team. We must do more than talk about democratic values. We must live them.
So, Ryan, that has elicited a full-fledged freakout in Germany and at the Munich Security Conference. Our friend of the show, I can never pronounce his name properly. I really apologize. Arnaud Bertrand actually put out a very thoughtful, obviously Arnaud is very, I don't know if you would call him from the left. I'm not really even sure which way you would say that he is. He's somebody who I guess is very critical of the U.S. and European bipartisan establishment. Shall we put it that way? He actually put it really well. He said, it's really hard not to make a parallel between J.D. Vance's speech right now at the Munich Security Conference and Putin's 2007 speech at the very same podium. Both were watershed moments that fundamentally transformed the existing consensus. Putin at the time delivered the speech that marked the beginning of the end of the unipolar moment. J.D.'s speech will probably be remembered as the speech that marked the beginning of the end of the post-World War II Western Alliance. And so he goes on, it's quite lengthy. I highly recommend people go and read it. But basically in the speech, it was both a declaration of quote unquote universal Western values and a criticism of the European architecture for both taking advantage and free riding off of the US nuclear umbrella, actively using quote unquote anti-democratic censorship policies and others to suppress nationalist movements and of course literally overthrow a government. Your Romania reporting, by the way, has probably got to be one of the most influential things DropSite has ever done. I mean, considering how much it's been picked up by Elon, by now being cited here by name by the Vice President of the United States, it's genuinely remarkable because it does show us that there is both kind of a horseshoe element to a lot of this, but really at a very, very high level. This is not about Ukraine. It's much, much bigger than that. It gets to the point of that there is a fissure between the United States and between Europe, both economically but culturally. There's criticism here of kind of the European EU-led establishment. What they view as their most important single conflict, Ukraine, is frankly, more of a footnote to the United States. And then really what I think that they are grappling with is at the very same time that this Munich Security Conference speech and other happened, Secretary of State Marco Rubio today is in Saudi Arabia for brokered peace talks with the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. And that demonstrates what I think is a true return to great power conflict and to multipolarity. We are no longer, working within the fakery of the United Nations or the European Union or some OSCE guidelines. It is the two great powers involved in the conflict sitting down across the table and saying, what are we doing here? Because at its heart, that's what it's always been about, all the trussings of the European Union, the Munich Security Conference, and more. So I'm curious, from your perspective, what you make of all of this before we get to some of the German reaction.
It was interesting to me that J.D. Vance didn't kind of point out the Biden administration's role, because it's one thing, he wouldn't have to necessarily say, okay, and the U.S. is guilty on all of these things, could have just blamed it on Biden if he wanted to, but he didn't do that. He suggested that these European censorship and big tech policies kind of came out of nowhere, and that the Romanian election that was overturned was driven by this former EU commissioner or other elements within Europe. And certainly there were those elements that were fine to see that that election annulled. The first major power to call into question the validity of the Romanian election was the United States.
Yes.
And the United States basically greenlit the annulling of the election by coming out and saying that. And as we reported in our story, it was USAID-funded entities that were involved in the concoction of this conspiracy claim that said Russia actually came in and used a fake TikTok
This is
operation.
basically Arnaud's point, where he's like, this obfuscates much of the United States.
So why would he do that? That's an
That's a good question. I honestly don't know, because I think you're totally right. That's one of the things that I actually most agreed with Arnaud's thread is, listen, I mean, I'm very critical of European migration policy and all of that, but he is correct where he's like, hey, look, you guys are the people who destroyed Afghanistan. He's like, you're the ones who
Syria for the most part.
It. I mean, I guess what I would say is it's not like there weren't a whole bunch of NATO troops there as well, and they weren't some of the biggest drivers of the permanent occupation of Afghanistan was built on much of these European European institutional liberal values, as in like, oh, we need to stay there so girls can go to school, or, beyond any sort of national interest. That's largely what I think European policy has become. It's about genuflecting. It's about, really, it's about, even the censorship, the censorship regime on Romania, the Ukraine literal worship, like so much of it comes down to defending like capital L liberal values across the continent. It's part of the reason why they hate their own nationalist movements so much, when, in my opinion, they're more responsible for their rise than anyone. Merkel's ideology leads to Brexit. It leads to the rise of the AfD in Germany. It leads to the National Front winning unbelievable margins in the French election. It's actually, the destruction of the French establishment. So when you think about all of that, the roots of it come down to migration. But I think a lot of the roots of it also come down to, the subservience to like this, to this non-national identity, which is the European Union. And so much of the current European population, and especially the European diplomatic and elite class, view themselves as Europeans first and not French and or German first, which is just not really compatible with, like putting your own citizens forward, which is why their own citizens are really revolting against a lot of these things.
It is, and the other point I agreed with Arnaud there, though, is that one of the shared European values that exists over the last hundreds of or thousands of years is war.
Yeah, true. That's true.
Like they love to do war.
They are warlike people. No, I'm joking.
They are a warlike people, and so for the Trump administration to be pushing a combination of we need more nationalism in Europe, and the European nations need to individually spend more money on their military budgets. It's like, have we completely forgotten what happened, in the 1930s and 1940s and the 1910s and the 1870s and the 1830s and the 1850s?
The alternative, right, to that is that the United States should be the ones that's the guarantor of all of their security, while they free ride off of that with their free healthcare,
or maybe
us, mass borders.
Maybe we, China, and Russia together, like just keep.
Well, we're going to get to that.
Babysit them.
That's
and
right.
At the same time, you've got China like sending its diplomats over to Europe, being like, you know what? We already told you that the U.S. is a nasty landlord. I think it was Singapore Prime Minister said, the U.S. has gone from like being this kind of hegemon to now this like low rent landlord coming around hitting us up for the rent.
Well, yeah, but that's they've also been delinquent on that rent for quite a long time. This is part of the difficulty, which is for all of our money and all of that, when the push comes to shove, what do? They're the ones who are major importers of Chinese cars, of Huawei, all their infrastructure. They openly buck any U.S. attempts to try and tell them to try and implement the same sort of export control. So in a lot of ways, they are the people who have created their own disaster. They've decided to they've basically tried to ensnare our country through worship of the transatlantic alliance. And I'm not kidding. It as is an actual worship. The one last thing that Biden's
over there, so
that Biden's dementia-addled brain was able to cling to was what? I expanded NATO. It literally,
got
like
Sweden into NATO.
When he's on his deathbed, he'll be saying AUKUS and NATO. Like that's what he views his legacy as. He'll probably forget his own grandchildren's name before he forgets NATO and the fact that he brought Finland into the alliance. So that just demonstrates what we're dealing with in terms of America's elite. Part of the reason why a lot of this stuff is getting amplified. So we got that. We have the German Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, who immediately criticized J.D. Vance. You had I think it was the Vice Chancellor who took the podium immediately after Vance, where he was like, I was going to give a prepared speech, but I have to just sit here and say how outrageous it is there. So, I mean, at a basic level, number one, they're not used to being talked to this way. But two is, like Arnaud said, they are dealing with a shakeup in the way that things usually go. Usually the way that this Ukraine peace talk stuff would go is like, oh, well, we would gather the G6, not the G7, right? We would gather the G6, sans Russia. We would all create prepared statements, and there would be the European Union would sign on, and NATO, et cetera. And then, as a, quote, united front, we would go and we would negotiate. Now, it would never work because the Europeans, the UK, and others are fanatically obsessed with defending Ukraine. And instead, Trump is like, no, I'm the guarantor of the NATO. I'm guarantor of NATO security. I'm guarantor of the EU's security. I'm going to go and hash this out with Putin, and you guys are going to swallow it and deal with it. And I mean, to be honest, I think that is basically true in terms of how it will all shake out. Now, I'm not saying that they will go quietly, and Zelensky himself has now made some declarations in a new interview with Meet the Press. Let's take a listen to that.
That President Trump said this week. He did not say yes when he was asked if he sees Ukraine as an equal member in the peace process. He did say later that Ukraine would have a seat at the table. Have you been given any assurances that Ukraine will have an equal seat at the negotiating table?
So I will never accept any decisions between the United States and Russia about Ukraine. Never. And our people, never. And our adults and children and everybody. It can't be so. This is the war in Ukraine against us, and it's our human losses. And we are thankful for all the support, unity between USA, in USA, around Ukraine support, bipartisan unity, bipartisan support. We're thankful for all of this. But there is no any leader in the world who can really make a deal with Putin without us, about us. The risk that Russia will occupy Europe is 100%.
If the United States pulls out of NATO,
Yes.
Russia will occupy Europe.
Yes, so not all the Europe. They will begin from those countries, as I said, who are big our friends, but small countries who've been in the USSR and the Soviet Union. They will begin, and we'll see what will be the answer. But Europe will not answer because they don't have. They will begin to defend itself. Each country defend itself, and at this moment, so Russia will get all the successes with all the territories they will want. I don't know what they will want. 30% of Europe, 50. I don't know. Nobody knows.
So there we go from Zelensky in terms of his declaration. I mean, I don't know about this last part. If the U.S. pulls out of NATO, I don't see anybody saying the U.S. is going to pull out of NATO. Really, what he's upset about, Ryan, is that Trump said, no, you're not going to be in NATO,
Right.
which is the most obvious declaration. But what's really crazy is you're watching the European Union trying to figure all this out, and the Europeans. So let's put the next one, please, up on the screen. This is what I alluded to. Quote, left out of the Ukraine talks, Europe races to organize a response. Just yesterday, the Prime Minister of the UK, Keir Starmer, said that the UK would provide peacekeeping troops inside of Ukraine if the United States were to not do so. Now, already the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, has said, number one, no U.S. peacekeeping role will ever happen on the ground. Now, the fact that two, that NATO membership for Ukraine is basically off the table, and three, that the return to 2014 borders is unrealistic. I don't know. I literally don't know how anyone could argue against those three proposals. People are saying, oh, it's a concession that to say reality. I don't think that's a concession. I mean, a concession would be, honestly, a concession would be putting our own forces on the ground for a place that has absolutely zero national interest to the United States. But overall, you're watching this all get shaken up. So I'm curious for your reaction here.
Yeah, I mean, we threw all the weapons that we had stored outside the DC suburbs and shipped them over to Ukraine and threw them at Russia. Ukraine threw hundreds and hundreds of thousands of lives at the line there.
Possibly more. Nobody
Possibly even more. And these are where the lines are. So if somebody didn't want that to be the case, what is the option for them? Like it's not as if we have more weapons that we could really throw at them. Like the Ukraine was allowed to strike, Russia inside Russia with some of those long-range missiles. But even if we gave them every long-range missile we had and let them shoot them as far as they want into Russia, Russia has an industrial base and a population that is many times larger than Ukraine's. And that's simply the case. Like there was some hope that Russia's economy would completely collapse as a result of sanctions and the war economy. The economy is struggling in Russia for sure, but it did not collapse. And so the reality is that Ukraine is not playing with much of a deck at this point. And Ukraine also knew that if Trump won this election, they were screwed.
Oh, absolutely.
That was
they even kind of said that.
They said that.
Yeah.
They said that out loud because they knew it. We knew it. Everybody knew it. Now it's happened, and now they're screwed. And then you have to ask, then what was all of this for?
Right.
What did so many people sacrificed their lives
Well, you
for.
know what it was for, because unfortunately, the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson and other kind of said it all out loud. It's about killing as many Russians as possible. I guess we just forgot.
It's just
that
psychotic because it was about weakening Russia, but it's like Russia's not necessarily weaker.
No,
Might be stronger.
I'm honestly, I predicted
even on
that
its
it would
own
be much more
psychotic
difficult for
terms,
them to get where they are. I'm stunned by how quickly they were able to bounce back. And by bounce back, I mean, they ate like a 20% haircut or something on their initial GDP, but after that, they've just turned their country into a war economy. They've sanctioned proof to all their financial institutions 10 times more than ever before. The Chinese have stepped in to supply all their consumer electronics. North Korea's got plenty of ammo. They're willing to send their own troops to fight and die for Russia. This is the best thing that's ever happened to North Korea.
Do we believe that yet?
I'm not. Well, that's a good point. You're right. I probably shouldn't fall victim to some of these
it might be
psyops.
true. I don't know.
I'm pretty active on Telegram in terms of these channels, viewing videos. I have not yet seen any videos of actual North Koreans dying who are on the front line. If you see any, I guess send it to me.
They keep showing us Russians that look Korean. It's like, bro, half of
that's
Russia
true. There
looks
are
like
a lot of Russian citizens who who have heritage
Asiatic.
from quite literally Asiatic, like from the steppe or from Kyrgyzstan or whatever. Any of these places that are still inside of the current Russian Federation. So great point on that one, Ryan. So the Ukraine last ditch appears to be selling like mineral rights, and this is something that Lindsey Graham has been pushing hard for many years. He certainly has found a way to Trump's heart, talking about how many awesome rare earth minerals they have and why that's the reason that we should support Ukraine. Let's take a listen.
I think the main thing for me is that Ukraine has value. Literally has value.
Right.
So you can talk about democracy, and people love talking about democracy here, which is it's great to talk about democracy, but where were you in 2014 when they actually needed you? So Trump now sees Ukraine differently.
Because the rare earth stuff.
Oh, my God. I said, playing golf, these people are sitting on literally a gold mine.
What did he say?
What do you mean? I showed him a map.
Yeah.
Look, everybody says Putin wants to reconstruct the Soviet Union and the Russian Empire.
You should have a map of the rare earth on the golf course?
Oh, not on the golf course.
But later.
Later, yeah. He's seen this. Look, this stuff that's one of the reasons the guys wanting to go into Ukraine is take their stuff. I mean, there's trillions of dollars of very valuable rare earth minerals that he's trying to take by force. And I told President Trump, that's not a good way to do business.
So you made Donald Trump a Ukraine hawk by showing him that map, huh?
Well, I don't know if he's the Ukraine hawk, but I made him understand that if you let Putin get away with this, grabbing stuff at not his by force, other people will start doing it.
So I guess that's all they have now in terms of what it looks like. There's some reporting here. Let's put this up there on the screen from Josh Rogan. He's very tapped in to the foreign policy elite. He says multiple lawmakers here in Munich told me that the U.S. congressional delegation presented Zelensky with a piece of paper they wanted him to sign, which would grant the U.S. rights to 50% of Ukraine's future mineral reserves. Zelensky, quote, politely declined to sign it. He continued, after a lot more reporting, I have more detail. This plan was presented to Zelensky by the U.S. ambassador in advance of the Secretary Bessent's trip to Kiev. Zelensky told the lawmakers about it today. In today's meeting, Zelensky was telling them about the paper, which many of them didn't even know about, not the other way around. He said he couldn't sign it because it didn't contain any security guarantees for Ukraine. So that's the current status of this.
So Josh had it a little bit backwards the first time around, but still a nice little scoop. But basically, what happened, so Secretary of the Treasury comes to Ukraine, and ahead of his trip, the U.S. ambassador presents Zelensky with this deal. Like, we will take 50% of your rare earths, and there's not even a quo on it. There's not even a promise that, and as a result, you will get these security guarantees. It's just like, by the way, we're going to take 50% of what you have. Zelensky declines to sign that, and then kind of tattles to the lawmakers who come a couple days later. One question I'm starting to have, though, is how rare these rare earths are.
Yes,
everywhere in the world.
That is such a good point.
They're everywhere.
I hear about it all. Yeah, you're right. The Congo, Afghanistan.
Venezuela,
Remember, people
Bolivia,
said Afghanistan was going to have $1 trillion I think Mexico does have a large lithium deposit.
They do.
Chile,
but
right?
is that rare?
Good point. I guess it's not. I hadn't thought about that. So we should get into Trump's ear and be like, they're not that rare.
They're
Mr.
just
President.
Earths.
They're actually in
Yeah.
Wyoming. They're sitting right here. We could go tap it right now. They're even in Canada. You know, we don't even have to annex Canada. We could just buy it from them. You don't need to send
$200
a bunch
billion
of people to
we're sending them,
die for all of this. So I will say, I think that remains the biggest obstacle to any sort of future Ukraine peace deal is this, convincing Donald Trump that in 50 years from now we'll be able to have access to all of these mineral rights or whatever. Apparently this is an active thing that Zelensky and them are pushing. But at a big level, again, just to prepare everyone, the Munich speech is paired with the Saudi Arabia peace talks, which are ongoing right now in Riyadh. We will, stay tuned for what that looks like, but it is the first real bilateral talks between the United States and Russia in years since the outbreak of the Ukraine conflict. Trump literally said he spoke to Putin. They mutually agreed to visit each other's countries, and we'll continue to keep everybody updated. Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.